Hello, and welcome to Haman Nature. I am Adam Haman, and with me as always is my buddy Tyrone, the porcupine hobo. How you doing, man?
Oh, man, did you get Tourette's there or something?
Well, no, I was just thinking that I was real thrilled when I first read Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, but it just occurred to me that you know what is almost 3 times better than 1? It's the number 3.
Awesome.
So why don't we just do 3 of everything?
Awesome. Three lessons. Yeah, well, glad to be hanging with my homie again for another episode. Now, Adam, you and I, because we're cool and
So cool.
And we might call our buddies homies, like I just did to you. But have you heard of the new slang word that is similar to that, but it's only being used by the upper echelons of the elite people in our society, the politicians and the corporatists and all those quote unquote people that are running the world. That instead of my homies, they call each other my cronies.
Golf clap. Very nice.
Well, folks, what that lame joke was all about is we are continuing our series on the review of the book Economics in 3 Lessons by Hunter Lewis.
It looks like this.
As part of our effort for economic education purposes.
I feel kind of bad, Tyrone.
Yeah.
That wasn't just a random bad joke. That was a bad joke in service of the theme of the show, and because of that, I should have leaned into it. I should have leaned into it a lot better. I apologize. That's my fault, not yours.
That's right. So where we left off in the last episode, we just finished lesson 2. So we're going to dive into lesson 3, which is made up of about 12 chapters or so. So we're going to break this up again like we did lesson 2 into several parts. And today we're going to do part 1 of lesson 3. We're going to cover chapters 10, 11, and 12. And the title of chapter 10, where we're going to start, is called Crony Capitalism. Ba-dum-bum. Okay, that was a very long setup for a terrible joke. Okay.
Shout out to my cronies, yo. See, I'm leaning in. I'm helping.
All right, my crony, you ready to get this show going?
The numbers say that people don't like these audiobook lecture series about economics, but I don't believe them. I think people really do love them, and they're just being secretive.
I mean, our download numbers, prove the case one way or the other.
I just assume they're good Austrian economists. They don't believe in IP, and they're just finding a way to steal it somehow.
That's right. Sounds
this
good
free product.
That's right. Right. All right. Here we go, folks. Chapter 10, Crony Capitalism. The struggle to establish free and honest prices in competitive markets is thousands of years old. For most of that time, powerful private interests, allied with even more powerful government officials, protected the opposite system of manipulated or controlled prices that has persisted through every era and always dominated the economic system. For most of history, this state of affairs never really had a name. It was just the system, and everyone accepted it as the norm. Human beings were organized into tribes. Tribes had rulers. Wealthy people allied themselves with the rulers. And below them, the common people subsisted on what the powerful and rich did not take for themselves. During the 18th century, when critics finally emerged in numbers, it began to be called mercantilism. In the 20th century, it had many names, but in this book will be called Crony Capitalism. There's a little sub-note here that might be interesting to read. Notes William Safire reported in 1998 that he had traced the first appearance of this phrase to a 1981 Time magazine article written by unidentified staff. Well, there you go, unidentified staff. Thanks for inventing the term crony capitalism.
It's precious.
Good work.
Yeah, that really caught on.
Good work. The unsung heroes. There's one guy in the newsroom somewhere. Like, I came up with it every time he hears it. That was me. All right. The advantage of this terminology is that it makes a clear distinction between this system and the concept of capitalism. Whatever the merit or demerit of the concept of capitalism, which in turn depends on how the term is defined, it is not the same as crony capitalism. The latter may, for publicity purposes, pretend to support a free price system, but this is just camouflage for its utter and usually ruthless rejection of a free price system. So let me just ask you that. How have you felt about the term crony capitalism? Do you have any feelings about it one way or the other?
Yeah, I'm generally in favor. It's important to make the distinction that the regime we live under now was nothing like capitalism, even though it's called a capitalist system. It's not free markets. It's this weird mixed economy, third way sort of thing, where the government gets itself involved in all manner of ridiculous areas, and we need to do something to point out the distinction so that people don't look at what 2025 and say, this is what capitalism means.
I get your point, and I get the point that Hunter Lewis is making in the book here, that it's setting itself apart from capitalism, or from the system. Whatever you just said, but I don't know. I've always had an issue with it in that I don't like using the word capitalism, because it almost to me like it's attaching a negative word to the word capitalism, and I just feel like whenever you do that, it just goes into the psyche of the subculture, and somehow the negativity gets attached to the word capitalism.
I think
without
that's a
the
good
meaning.
I think that's a good persuasive argument about how communication works and hypnosis and persuasion. I would only counter it that, like when you and I talk, we don't talk about crony capitalism, really. We talk about free markets, know.
Yeah.
But given that capitalism is in the zeitgeist and there isn't that much we can do about it, I think we have to have some term that attacks it directly.
Yeah.
And if it fades away, then this crony, addendum can fade away. But I think you need some sort of catchy term so that people know what you mean. So, and hopefully, if you do your job right, every time some persuadable person hears somebody talk about an evil of the capitalist system, maybe they'll think, oh, you mean crony capitalism, surely.
Mm-hmm. I guess the other thing that bugs me about it is it implies, or it almost says that, well, there is a version of capitalism called crony capitalism. Like, I guess what I'm saying is, it's not like our version of capitalism only has one version. There's not a crony version of it. You know what I mean? So it's like, why don't we call it just crony socialism instead of crony capitalism?
You could. Because again, it's this third way mixed economy thing. It's not the pure, if you favored socialism, you certainly wouldn't look at what we have here and go, see, it looks just like that.
Yeah.
It's a perversion.
I mean, I get it. People think America is capitalist, right? So we're kind of left because we would disagree that it's capitalist. We're trying to correct. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe one day I'll come up with something different.
I mean, I was going to bring this point up later, but there is an economic term that describes ostensible, private property ownership of the means of production, but with a whole bunch of government control. And it's called fascism or corporatism. Right. And, every year we slide a little bit, more towards that. As Hunter Lewis is going to say later, you could argue that 2/3 of our economy is controlled by the government in some way or another. That's debatable, but it's a huge number. It's we used to think of it in terms of like a third, maybe. It's way more than that.
Where do you think, how did America get to be known as the capitalist country? Like, America was founded before the term capitalism came into being. So somehow we became known as the capitalists. Like, I'm curious, how that happened. Where did that come? How did that come
I'm
about?
purely speculating, but I think it's just because in the 20th century, we just were the most productive. Mostly
So you
because our factories didn't get blown up in the 2 world wars.
So you don't think they were running around in 1860s France saying that capitalist country America?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I doubt it.
Like, when did the capitalism association link between that word in the United States come into being, and who was behind it?
Yeah, I assume it was point of pride for a long time. If we're the most productive and we have maybe the freest system, debatable, but and we're cranking out all the butter and beans and tanks.
I think it was a psyop by the socialists.
Calling Alex Jones.
Because then they knew what their policies would do. It would destroy America. But if they could attach the word capitalism to America, then it's like, oh, see, capitalism's bad.
Our enemies aren't that clever.
Yeah, well,
we're just kind of dim.
there aren't too many Ellsworth Tuohys out there, really. Okay.
No.
All right, folks. Well, that was an interesting conversation. Thanks for tuning in. Barely even made it to the first page of chapter 10. Okay, here we go. Continuing on. The very earliest historical record of what might now be called crony capitalism dates to ancient China. Han Dynasty annals tell us that the Emperor Wu Di, 155 to 87 BCE, decided that government must control the economy and castrated his advisor.
Hey, now.
I'll say it again. And castrated his advisor. No, it's woo Sima Qian for daring to dispute his view. Although Wu Di said that he was setting up monopolies granted by the state in salt, iron, and other basic commodities in order to protect the common people from greedy merchants, his monopolies really just made a few merchants colossally rich and ensured a steady stream of kickbacks from them to court officials and to the emperor himself. Almost 2,000 years later, the Scottish economist Adam Smith restated Sima's case in words strikingly reminiscent of the early Chinese master's own. Quote, "The natural effort of every individual to better his own condition, when suffered to exert itself with freedom and security, is not only capable of carrying on the society to wealth and prosperity, but of surmounting 100 impertinent obstructions with which the folly of human laws too often encumbers its operations." Unquote. In the meantime, the Middle and later Roman emperors imitated Wu Di. They granted monopolies, instituted price controls punishable by death, debased the currency by stripping precious metals from coins, exacted ever harsher taxation, and reaped a whirlwind of corruption and economic collapse. As economist Jesus Huerta de Soto has written, quote, "Roman civilization did not fall as a result of the barbarian invasions. It undermined itself from within through its own economic policies, although serious plagues and also played a part in decimating and demoralizing the population," unquote. And also plagues.
And also, there were the plagues.
It kind of weakens the case a little bit when you throw something like that on. It's like, and Japan's constant use of resources to fight World War II decimated the population. Oh, and those 2 atomic bombs also played a role. It's like, well, how bad were the plagues? Because that kind of makes a difference. But no, I think we all can joke about the Roman Empire now. It's been long enough, right?
Sore subject still for some.
But no, I think that's quite commonly known that, they just became this gigantic governmental state, and they were doing all those things like high taxation, debasing the currency, which did ultimately lead to the economic collapse. All right, so, and continuing on, in Sung, China, 10th century, Common Era, merchants were classed with undertakers and other unclean groups. Whoa.
Ew.
And the government did not hesitate to confiscate mercantile fortunes that came to its attention, a pattern that persisted throughout Chinese imperial history. The great historian of commerce and capitalism, Fernand Braudel, acknowledges that, quote, in the vast world of Islam, especially prior to the 18th century, ownership was temporary, for there, as in China, property legally belonged to the prince. When the rich person died, his seigneury and all his possessions reverted to the Sultan of Istanbul or the Great Mogul of Delhi. In addition, André Raymond's recent study of 18th century Cairo shows us that the great merchants there rarely were able to maintain their positions for more than a generation. They were devoured by political society, unquote. The historian David Landis records the same thing in Japan. He cites the case of Yodoya Tatsugoro, scion of the leading commercial family in Osaka. The family had made itself immensely rich, had also performed many services to the nation, and had regularly lent money to the ruling classes. These loans could not be refused, but once made, they led to strained relations. In the end, all of the family's money was confiscated by the government on the grounds that Yodoya was living beyond his social status. Oh, a terrible, terrible crime. Landis describes even more predatory environment in the Ottoman Turkish Empire of the 14th through early 20th centuries. Quote, the Ottomans had taken over a region once strong, now enfeebled, looting as they went. Now they could no longer take from outside. They had to generate wealth from within to promote productive investment. Instead, they resorted to habit and tried to pillage the interior to squeeze their own subjects. Nothing, not even the wealth of high officials, was secure. Nothing would be more self-destructive. Unquote. Looking back over world history, and especially more modern history, governments have gradually become wiser than the Ottoman sultans. They have learned that it is better to let private capital accumulate, to pluck the goose of private enterprise, not to kill it. But even so, they are tempted to make minor deals that turn out to be anything but minor in their consequences. For example, in 17th century France, the rich woolen, silk, and linen producers persuaded the government to ban the import or production of cotton cloth, which was then a new product, in order to protect themselves from competition. On one level, this produced rather comical results as government spies began, quote, peering into coaches and private houses and reporting that the governess of the Marquis de Cormoy had been seen at her window clothed in calico of a white background with big red flowers almost anew, unquote.
How dare she?
Yeah. All was not gossip and amusement, however. Enforcement of the rules led many thousands of ordinary people to be executed or sent into gruesome labor on ships. Perhaps most importantly, Britain created its industrial revolution and surged ahead economically by producing cotton textiles, while France's refusal to allow cotton meant that it stagnated and fell far behind.
It's weird how...
That's the end of chapter 10.
It's weird how the people in power find a way to use that power to steal stuff and make themselves rich.
And what's very interesting is, like, how did cotton revolutionize everything? That's kind of crazy. Like, the history of cotton, man, that's...
You just never know what it's going to be. It's a great thing about invention. But look, I mean, as Hunter Lewis says, you know, go all the way 2,100 years ago in China, they're running the exact same play. Mm-hmm. In order to protect citizens from greedy businessmen, the government creates a monopoly. And then, of course, we know what happens with monopolies. Too little of the good is produced at too high a price, so all those profits get kicked back to the leadership. I mean, how many times have we seen this play run? Billions at this point. And the other funny observation before we move on is just that the leaders who want to plunder from us always have this weird needle they have to try and thread. You know, they want to grab up as much of what the citizenry produces they can, but they don't want to kill the golden goose, or, scare or intimidate the goose into not being as productive. And, that's a delicate balance.
Yeah. Yeah, that plucking the goose thing, I'm sure you've heard the same stat or study that throughout history, governments, of course, have tried to tax as much as they can and take as much as they can. And there seems to be some sort of natural limit to what humans will take. And I've read or heard it's about 40% of what you produce. Once government starts taxing you above that 40% mark, that's when things start to become unsettled, tensions, and people tend to either overthrow their governments or they just tend to collapse. So obviously that plucking the goose, the sweet spot seems to be about 40%. So that we'll put up with. So I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't want to dwell on it, but it is funny. I mean, the Soviets thought they needed to actually create a new version of humanity in order to get away with what they're doing,
right.
The Soviet man. And you could imagine writers like Aldous Huxley, thinking that maybe the government could get away with a whole lot more if they found a way to, through entertainments and soma and sex,
right,
figure out a way to dull the population. And ideology does this too, by the way. I mean, if people had bought into that Soviet system, who knows how much they would have put up with, which is why governments propagandize. It's critically important.
All right, well, let's move on to Chapter 11. This one is titled Laissez-faire Contra the Cronies.
I think that's law is faire.
That's right. Some sort of mythical fairy elf. In reviewing a few stories from the long history of crony capitalism, we confront a paradox. Government exists to protect us from private violence, theft, and fraud. But once it is established, who will guard us from the guardians? We can walk away forever from a bad boss, merchant, or customer, but we cannot walk away from the government. Given the extreme difficulty of establishing effective and honest government, it is not surprising that most human beings have remained in desperate poverty during the thousands of years of recorded so-called civilized life. Until the 18th century, the human economy as a whole barely grew at all. And even since then, the rate of growth has not been exceptional. Why is this? Economist John Maynard Keynes wrote that, quote, "The destruction of the inducement to invest by a tendency to keep that wealth one had under a mattress was the outstanding evil, the prime impediment to the growth of wealth in the ancient and medieval worlds," unquote. Yeah, because those ancient slaves in ancient Egypt were just stuck in their gold coins under their comfy mattresses.
So greedy.
Maynard Keynes. What a dummy. Hunter Lewis contradicts this, though, by continuing on, saying, but Keynes neglected to mention that people hid their money because they feared theft, and they especially feared theft by government. Dun, 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 dun. He was even more fanciful, or perhaps disingenuous, in suggesting that 20th century governments would decide economic issues based on, quote, long views, the general social advantage, and collective wisdom, unquote. All of this seems to have been premised on government officials doing what he told them to do. At other times, Keynes described government officials as boobies. Okay.
I think he means seabirds, not the fun kind. Yeah.
The most often proposed remedy for this problem is to try to rein in the state, and especially to restrict its role in the economy. The case for a state that acts only as an economic umpire, not an economic leader, that scrupulously limits itself to setting rules that apply to everyone, that does not try to intervene to assist any person or persons, or otherwise pursue its own economic aims and objectives. That case has been made in many eras and in many countries. Bois Guilbert asked the French government in the early 18th century to laissez-faire la nature, by which he meant to get out of the way of commerce. I always thought it was laissez-nous-faire. Leave us alone.
Really? I didn't know that.
What's that?
I never had an opinion. I knew it was French for hands off or something. But
yeah, but I always thought it was laissez-nous-faire. Leave us alone. Then it just got contracted to laissez-faire. I've not heard laissez-faire la nature or la nature.
Well, are you going to question the guy who gave us Roni Tories?
No, not at all. Not at all. Advocates of laissez-faire thought they were applying basic logic to the problem at hand. If crony capitalism represents an illicit alliance of government and private interest in the economy, the only sure way to combat it is to separate economy from state, just as the U.S. Constitution separates church from state. This doctrine, embraced by many of the leading minds of the late 18th and early 19th centuries in Britain, America, and elsewhere, including most of the American founders, was not, as most think today, an attempt to hold down the working classes or give free rein to abusive bosses. They were not advocating sweatshop conditions for workers or child labor. On the contrary, these reformers began by seeking to free middle-class merchants from the strangling economic cronyism of the courts. Over time, they came to embrace a multitude of beliefs that came to be known as liberalism, and then later classical liberalism, to differentiate them from Franklin Roosevelt's version of the term. Had these reformers not succeeded to at least a small degree in Britain and then the United States, it is very doubtful that the Industrial Revolution of these two countries would ever have happened, or would have subsequently spread to other countries. The early laissez-faire reformers generally agreed that banning slavery, child labor, or inhuman working conditions is legitimately part of the umpire's role. British Member of Parliament Richard Cobden, 1804 to 1865, one of the principal leaders of the movement, and over a century later cited by U.S. President Ronald Reagan as a key influence on his thinking, insisted on getting government out of a leadership role in the economy. But he voted for restrictions on child labor as well for more child education. Like other laissez-faire reformers, he also fought for broadening the right to vote and the removal of restrictions on women and Jews. American churches, constitutionally separated from government and mostly governed within their own moral framework, are still subject to strict national laws. The laissez-faire idea was that the economy should operate in a similar way. In this view, there is no discipline more severe than market discipline, which is why businesses try so hard to escape it with government assistance. The discipline of market competition, which compels producers to justify everything they do in order to win and hold customers, will provide more protection for workers and especially children than laws alone, especially when the government enforcers of law can be bought. Advocates of laissez-faire have long become accustomed to having their words distorted or fall on deaf ears in most countries and most eras. Not long before the French Revolution, Jacques Turgot was appointed Comptroller General of France and tried in 20 brief months to reform the tottering economic system along free price, competitive market lines. But he was forced to resign, thereby sealing the fate of Louis XVI and the old regime. Etienne Bonnat, the Abbé de Condillac, exclaimed that experience teaches government nothing. How many mistakes have been made? How many times have they been repeated? And they are still repeated. Unquote. Although laissez-faire reforms failed in this instance and throughout most of history, they made a little headway in Britain and America in the late 18th and early 19th century. The historian Lord Macaulay observed that, as a result, at least in Britain, quote, profuse government expenditure, heavy taxation, absurd commercial restriction, corrupt tribunals, disastrous wars, persecutions, conflagrations, inundations have not been able to destroy capital so fast as the exertions of private citizens have been able to create it. Unquote.
Yeah,
so is he saying there, like the government wasn't able to destroy it faster?
Yeah,
than
he's saying
humans could
in
create
that.
it?
Yeah, he's saying that this is a bright moment in history because
I
even
was
though
like,
the
wait,
government,
what?
even though the government is doing all these horrible things, they've allowed enough freedom for economic productivity to outstrip it by at least a little bit, which of course raises the question, well, how much better could it have been if they hadn't done all those horrible things?
Right. That's what I was getting confused about. It's
And
the
you've got
Trumpian economics of we'll just grow our way out of it.
Yeah, well, that's just a standard hand waving away. Quit ignoring me. I'll sprinkle fairy dust on the economy and we'll grow. But what the chapter is so great about, it shows, this constant effort for the productive class to try and get away from the evil predation, stealing of government in various forms. And now that you've gotten a little bit of the boot off our necks so we can start being productive, it's just such a crying shame that as soon as you get a little breathing room, not only do politicians want to keep stealing, because that's what they do, but now you've got people trying to petition the government to try and get extra, benefits for their class or race or sex or whatever, their own interest group. And it's tragic because anytime you think you're going to use the government to put one over on the other guy, you're going to find yourself wishing you hadn't, because it would be one thing to just constantly, if everybody had the mantra, keep the government small so it can't steal and nobody can use it to steal it from us. But if you're trying to empower the government to do some stealing for yourself, well, guess what you've just done? You've created a government big enough to treat you as cattle, just the way you're trying to use it to, like I said, get one over on the other guy. I mean, laborers have some excuse where they think they need to petition the government to get special rights against their employers, and it's a fool's errand. People need to figure out that's not the right answer.
Well said. All right. We're going to go on to chapter 12 now. So that was a little bit of a historical journey. And now chapter 12, today's crony capitalism. One can only imagine.
Rolling with my cronies. Buddy, I really appreciate that joke you were trying to make earlier. I can't believe I poo-pooed it. I'm loving that now.
What up, crony? You can just see like the CEOs of all the drug companies in the back room
cattle
with
addicts,
like O'Connell and Harry Reid, or well, obviously he's dead, but
him
in the
too,
back
who
room,
cares?
They just fist bumping each other. These old dudes. What up, crony?
In my mind, that is what's happening.
All right. One can only imagine what the 19th century laissez-faire reformers would have thought of life at the beginning of the 21st century in Zimbabwe, a country once described as the breadbasket of Africa, but which writhed in misery under the iron grip of Robert Mugabe's government. Land redistribution schemes had turned over much of the best cropland to Mugabe supporters who had not the slightest knowledge of farming. As a result, over half of the country's 12 million people were on the brink of starvation. In many cases, government opponents were forcibly relocated to remote rural areas with no means of subsistence at all. In towns, gasoline supplies had long since disappeared, although rumors caused people periodically to race to closed pumps to see if anything had arrived. Everything was price controlled, often at a price well below the cost of production. To avoid evasion of the price controls, no new product, brand, or packaging could be sold without prior written permission from one of the ministries, which always, of course, required a bribe. The economy as a whole was estimated to be imploding at a rate of 10% a year, but property and market values had already lost 99% of their previous value. Throughout all this, Mugabe gave speeches railing against greedy entrepreneurs, ruthless markets, and the forces of globalization. Nor was rampant crony capitalism limited to poor or small countries. Many of the American, European, Chinese, and Russian mega-rich of the 1990s and 2000s got their vast new wealth through government favors or connections, or by understanding how government worked. This was just as true on Wall Street in the U.S. as in Beijing or Moscow. Wall Street had first use of all the new money printed by the Federal Reserve during the bubble years, beginning in the mid-1990s. It made as much profit in the first 3 years under President Obama as in the prior 8 years under President George W. Bush, notwithstanding the intervening crash that helped elect Obama on a platform of hope and change.
Before we move on, just going back to Zimbabwe there for a second, one of the things about free markets is it, through the profit and loss mechanism, it directs physical resources into the hands of people who can best use them to produce goods and services the public wants, like, say, food to eat. And when, like Robert Mugabe, you instead give all the, allocate all the farmland through the political process to your buddies, that those resources go into the hands of people who can't use them effectively, and everybody starves.
Following the crash of 2008, Sol Sanders, columnist for a conservative, quote-unquote, newspaper, wrote that President Obama should, quote, begin weekly meetings in closed session with a group of recognized private sector leaders to brainstorm recovery strategy and tactics, unquote.
This is straight out of Roosevelt, right?
No worse advice can be imagined. Such a meeting, behind closed doors no less, would not be a recipe for job creation. It would be a recipe for more of the cronyism that had already destroyed millions of jobs and brought the economy to the brink of ruin in the crash. Whom would the president invite? Which of the powerful private economic interests that despise open, honest, competitive markets and conspire with government to prevent any change from threatening them? Would it be the then head of the president's outside economic council, the CEO of General Electric, which had just been rescued by the government and was also a major government contractor? The heads of the major banks that had been bailed out and were still being bailed out by the Federal Reserve? A firm like Goldman Sachs, which, although not a bank, had been given access to the loan window at the Fed as if it were a bank, and thus could borrow billions of newly created government money at close to zero cost? Would it be the heads of drug companies whose government-granted monopolies have been zealously guarded with threats of jail as well as fines by the Food and Drug Administration and agency drug companies directly fund? The head of General Motors, also recently bailed out by the government, in a way that blatantly violated bankruptcy law, that took every last penny from the mom-and-pop bond and warranty holders and turned the company over to the same union that had destroyed it? Monsanto, whose controversial GMO seed, food, and insecticide herbicide products have been virtually strong-armed into other countries by the U.S. government, as WikiLeaks documents revealed? Such access to government leaders in a crony capitalist economy is worth a lot. How much? Here's one measure. When word of Timothy Geithner's selection to be President Obama's Treasury Secretary leaked, the stocks of companies considered close to him immediately jumped by an average of 15%. This is hardly surprising. Geithner had already saved many of these companies billions of dollars when, as president of the New York Fed, he had quietly vetoed a plan for banks to take losses on their contracts with failed insurer AIG, and had instead decided that the government, that is the taxpayers, would absorb the loss. How nice of us!
Yeah, we're good guys that way.
English century economist Adam Smith warned that, "Oi, people of the same trade seldom meet together. I can't do a Scottish accent. I'm trying to do my who's the guy on The Simpsons, the groundskeeper Willie?
That's
Oi, my lawnmower. Me lawn.
People of the same
There we
trade
go.
seldom
There
meet
we go.
together, even for merriment and diversion, but conversation ends in conspiracy against the public. Talking like that makes me cough.
Or in some contrivance to raise prices. Ta-da! Okay. How much worse, then, if these merchants are meeting behind closed doors with the President of the U.S. or Secretary of the Treasury? The Obama White House presumably understands the potential value of such meetings because it first offered to provide full logs of all White House visitors, pointedly excluding the first 9 months, and then began scheduling lobbyist visits outside the White House at a nearby Jackson Place offices, where the promise of logs was deemed not to apply, or even at coffee houses. By the end of President Obama's 8 years in 2016, the New York Times, a fervid supporter, claimed that the administration had enjoyed an unparalleled scandal-free record. Here are just a few counterfactual examples. When the president finally got his tax increase on the rich passed at 2 a.m. on January 1st, 2013, the fiscal cliff bill, in the very same legislation, he included massive federal giveaways to favored industries donating to him. The giveaways more than canceled any revenue gain to the Treasury from the tax increases. In effect, taxes on the rich had not been increased. Money had just been shifted from one group of the rich to another. Obama's stimulus bill of 2009, supposedly about infrastructure projects such as roads and bridges, directed much of its money to friendly state and local governments to cover their expanding payrolls and deficits, as well as to friendly private interest donors. According to one study, 71% of the funds going to green energy grantees benefiting from the bill were also friendly political donors.
I'm shocked. I'm just shocked, Tyrone.
Many of these crony system players were not even U.S. citizens.
The devil you say.
About 70% of the money newly minted by the Fed after the 2008 crash went to support foreign banks. An MSNBC headline read, "Wind at their backs, powerful Democrats help Chinese energy firm chase stimulus money." The article explained how Senator Reid received campaign money from a Chinese project's backers. Under U.S. law, foreign nationals may legally contribute to U.S. federal and state campaigns so long as they hold a green card. A complaint was also filed with the Federal Election Commission on massive money coming into the Obama campaign from overseas with no real idea of its source. The FEC apparently buried the complaint. The goal of cronyism is, of course, to form lucrative alliances that serve the purposes of both special interests and government officials. There is also an understanding that enmity between these powerful forces can be costly for both. The classic example was when citizen challenges began to be filed during the Nixon administration in the early 1970s to take away the lucrative television broadcast licenses of the Washington Post. Ben Bradley, the Post's editor, later described the Post's reaction. Quote, "Our stock price nosedived as the word got out that the Post was going to lose its TV station income. It was a scary time, and it had an absolutely critical impact on us internally. From that time on, we knew Nixon hated us, and we reciprocated. Without that, the Post would never have behaved so confidently in its reporting of Watergate, which led to Nixon's resignation," unquote. That's an interesting little nugget of history that I'm completely unaware of. The Washington Post had television company?
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. I didn't know that either.
Wow. Interesting. And so then as part of their reciprocation, they went hog wild on Watergate. Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. probably a local affiliate of one of the three biggies.
As this clearly states, a crony battle over TV licenses was instrumental in the destruction of a presidency. Most of the many deals involving the president or Congress, like the story of the Post TV licenses in 1973, are rarely covered by the press. Most crony capitalism operates on a more prosaic level behind closed doors and receives even less coverage. For example, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is supposed to protect the public from contaminated meat. But when small meat producers proposed to test each cow slaughtered for mad cow disease, a deadly illness transferable to humans, the department repeatedly ruled in the early 2000s that such testing could not be done. In issuing this edict, the department sided with large meat producers who not only wished to avoid the cost of testing, but also wanted to use the power of government to prevent smaller producers from gaining a sales advantage from doing so. The regulators saw large meat packers, not the general public, as their clients. To learn about this, one had to consult trade publications because the larger media could not care less. Smaller scale deals take place every day in state houses and city halls with even less scrutiny. A few committed believers in government control of the economy, and especially of prices, are willing to admit that their ideas have not lived up to expectations. Nevertheless, as Ludwig von Mises pointed out, quote, government interference with business is still very popular. As soon as someone does not like something that happens in the world, he says, the government ought to do something about it. What do we have a government for? Unquote. Philosopher Michael Novak, who once believed in state leadership himself, shakes his head at this. Quote, one of the most astonishing characteristics of our age is that ideas, even false and unworkable ideas, even ideas which are no longer believed in by their official guardians, rule the affairs of men and run roughshod over stubborn facts. Ideas of enormous destructiveness, cruelty, and impracticality retain the allegiance of elites that benefit from them, or feel that abandoning them would violate a taboo. Unquote.
Yeah, that's a real good point.
Chapter 12. Final thoughts on that chapter?
That's just a really good point at the end. If you've been advocating your whole life for government to get in there and do something on your behalf, you're going to be very resistant to evidence that, strikes at the pillars of your belief system. And as this chapter showed, in lesson after lesson, we see that the power of government is used against the citizenry in favor of crony interests, with all sorts of specious rationales trotted out as to why. But the sick part is, because they're busy living their lives, most citizens don't really know that any of this is going on. You've got that concentrated benefits, dispersed costs thing going on, where you're getting bitten to death by mosquitoes as the average citizen. You don't really know why. You don't really know what's going on. And one other thing that he mentioned just briefly, all this new money being injected into the economy and the inflation that it causes reminds me of the Cantillon effect, or Cantillon. I'm never sure how to pronounce it. But when the government creates money, it doesn't just increase the number in everybody's checking account or wallet by the same amount, magically overnight. It gets injected in specific places. So not only does the counterfeiter, so to speak, get an immediate benefit that's obvious, but the first person that gets the money that was created, say a defense contractor, and they go out and buy goods and services in the economy, they get to do so before the prices have adjusted to the new increase in monetary inflation. So there's a sense in which everybody is hurt by inflation, but if you're not in the class of people that get that new money early in the distribution, circulation pattern, you pay the prices of inflation way more than people who get that money closer to the spigot, so to speak.
All right. Great point. And that finishes up part 1 for lesson 3 there. So for the 3 of you left still watching this,
we love you.
You probably already have done this, but If you haven't, click that like and subscribe button. Every subscribe helps, and we're trying to get that first milestone. And spread, yeah. Thanks for tuning in. I don't know. I'll edit something together there. Adam,
Thank you, Tyrone.
it's been a train wreck.
Good luck editing this. Thanks, Tyrone. That was great. Thank you for the 3 people who are still with us. I'm sorry to the rest of you. We love this book. We're going to keep doing these audiobook lecture series. And thanks for all of you who appreciate it. Like and subscribe. We will catch you all next time on Human Nature.
When the rich person died, his
Signory? Signory. From Signorage.
his seniority.
Tell you what.
The
Pronounce
porcupine.
Pronounce it all the way out, just like it looks, like it reads, just for fun.
The
Say
porcupine.
ig niuri.
The porcupine is not smart enough to be giving economic lessons. I can't even read from it. Well, that's a word I've never heard of. In reviewing a very few... Come on, Hunter. What the hell is this?
The word is ronitories. And you're going to try to tell
What the
me.
fuck is a ronitory?
You're telling me you don't know ronitories? Renitories? I give up. I don't know that word.
Okay. Gotta stop. Time out. We gotta Google this one here.
Yeah, and get it to pronounce it for you, too, and then we'll just throw this
Define
in the dustbin of history.
Tory.
Oh, the ronitories.
Based on search results, the term ronitories does not appear to be a recognized English word. It is highly likely a misspelling of notorieties. In reviewing a very few something from the long history of crony capitalism. What
Notorieties?
the fuck could that be?
I say we make it stories or notorieties. Your call.
What the hell?
Or pronounce it really slow and carefully. Ronitories. And just keep going.
This is not a word. This is a typo of some kind. But what could he possibly be trying to...
He means, Tyrone, in reviewing a very few ronitories from the long history of crony capitalism, we conclude a paradox. Confront a paradox. Crying so hard I can't see.
It's just got to be stories, right?
It's either stories or notorieties.
Or histories.
Okay, you can do that one too.
All right. I'm editing this myself. There. We made it to the first sentence of chapter 11. Get serious,
Economics is
Adam.
difficult.
Get serious.
Economics is harder than it looks, folks.
Okay. Well, that was fun.